Well, the most obvious way that economics matters is that it has an enormous prestige in our society. Economists have a level of respect and authority that no other social scientist, arguably no other academic discipline, possesses. An enormous number of policy debates are conducted in the language of economics. There's an ability of an economist to speak directly in policy settings and political settings in a way that most academics simply can't. And so, Joan Robinson has that famous line about, the reason you study economics is to avoid being fooled by economists. And there's some truth to that. Even if you think that the discipline is completely vacuous, it's worth investing in learning its language and techniques just in order to be able to at least criticize the arguments that other economists are making. But I would say we don't think that economics is completely worthless and vacuous. We think it actually does bring some positive ways of thinking to the larger conversation. One thing that really is sort of defining of economics is the insistence on formalizing ideas, expressing your thoughts in some sort of highly abstract way, either as a system of equations or a system of diagrams, in a way where you're sort of explicitly stating all of the causal relationships that you think exist in the story that you're trying to tell. And I think that's a useful habit of thinking that is not necessarily as widespread outside the economics profession. Sometimes you actually can learn new things just by writing down your assumptions and working through them. The whole debate in the heterodox field about wage-led growth and profit versus profit-led growth. What are the circumstances where a redistribution, from, let's say, profits to wages is likely to boost demand, and what are the situations where it's likely to reduce demand, I think is a sort of insight that comes out of trying to write down your vision of the economy as a system of equations. The notion of balance of payments constrained growth, where we kind of think that maybe for a lot of countries, the thing that's fundamentally driving the rate of growth that they can sustain is how elastic, how responsive to how income elastic their exports are versus their imports, is another sort of set of ideas that really comes out of, I think, writing down a formal model in the first case. So I think this is a useful discipline that economics, training as an economist gives you that people with other kinds of backgrounds don't have. This really sort of effort to make explicit your the kind of causal connections that you have in mind. Arjun, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. I think, of course, I agree with everything that Josh is saying, but I think it's also important to realize that economics has actually come up with some very useful concepts, if you will, right, to make sense of this world around us. Concepts like GDP or employment. These are actually concepts which are well-defined and measured, and it's not straightforward. It really helps us to have an understanding of the system as a whole. Admittedly, lots of economics education doesn't pay as much attention to it as it should. And I think maybe in your question, there was an implicit critique when you ask, why does economics matter? Maybe there are some people who feel that economics doesn't matter because of what's happened to the discipline in many ways. I think that, Josh and I both like this particular quote by the economist Trygve Havelmo. He says, the reason you learn economics is to be, I believe that phrase is, a master of the happenings of the real world, right? And I think that that's really why one should be doing economics, not as an exercise in and of itself, but really to understand what's happening in the world.
Yeah, that's right. The secret to doing good economics is to start from somewhere other than economics. If you come into economics with a deep set of political commitments, as Arjun and I would say both did, or if you come in with a desire to make money in the business world and you're associating with people who do that, or you come in because you're focused on a particular set of public debates that you want to clarify your thinking about. If you come in with some sort of other set of concerns that are going to guide you in terms of what's important, what's relevant, what's reasonable, then I think you'll find a lot of useful tools within economics. The problem arises with people, and unfortunately this I'd say is the majority of professional economists, who don't really have any intellectual base or personal, their intellectual development is entirely within the sort of academic economics. And I think then it becomes very easy to lose sight of the happenings of real life that this field is supposed to be illuminating.